That's okay. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. That's all right. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, this evening we have one item on the agenda, which is the superintendent's presentation of the fiscal year 2021 budget. We met in a board meeting this morning in a workshop and went through some preliminary questions that the board had for the administration. Tonight is the formal presentation. I suspect that after the formal presentation there will be some questions based on the presentation, but in the workshop on Wednesday morning we will be going through the budget in greater detail, section by section, and have the opportunity to ask more detailed, more specific questions on many of the items in the budget. So, Dr. McCursey? Let's.
Well, good evening. Good evening. Board, it's good to be with you again. This is a double header. Tonight's the traditional presentation of the budget to the full community. This is being live streamed. It's creating the public record. This presentation, compared to the past several years, will be quite brief, allowing us plenty of time to get into discussion. That started this morning. At the end of this presentation, I'll review for all assembled this budget schedule. This will be a very intensive month. To give you a couple watchwords for me that I'll have at the end again. My view on this whole process, while a difficult one, I'm going at it with optimism and patience that we can end up in the right place for all of our students in the Weston Public Schools. Let me provide an overview as to what is in this budget. Quite critically, we build this budget, and the we on this is all the people gathered to my left and behind me, particularly the principals, the cabinet, Mike DelMastro, and the rest of the leadership team, the assistant principals and the assistant directors, all of whom are here tonight. Ultimately, the superintendent has to own and hold ultimate responsibility for what's in this budget, but it's very much built in a team-based way, especially with the cabinet, Mike DelMastro, and the principals. All of this material has been built and reviewed, though, by the rest of the leadership team. The goals here are critical to us in Weston. On our website is this active bullseye, if you will. The heart of what we do here in Weston is developing global citizens. We define that on the website in very clear ways, and there are 5 driving goals that have been with us now for a couple years. Academic excellence, healthy learning environment, digital learning, gauging district progress, and resources for learning. A couple years ago, we weren't explicit about academic excellence, but we feel we need to be. We should not be shy about that being our driving purpose here in Weston is academic excellence. We feel better about saying that when we pair it with the healthy learning environment. In that sense of here in Weston, we stand for and work for all aspects of our students, intellectually, socially, emotionally, physically. The digital learning piece, let me emphasize, is to support, not take over and dominate learning, but to be a supportive piece in the teaching and learning process, the research process, the data management process. It's there to support. Progress, gauging district progress. Progress is the key word there. How do we improve over time? Many of you have heard me say the phrase, many of us are parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, anyone in our family. No one number indicates that child, no one day indicates that child. It's multiple indicators, multiple measures over time, and we have a rather sophisticated approach to that here in Weston. Resources for learning, as it's defined on the website, that's acknowledging, yes, the operations, yes, the facilities, yes, the financial management, but it's also acknowledging two critical partnerships here in Weston. One is with the PTO, particularly active PTO in Weston, particularly generous PTO with their time, talent, and treasure, as well as the Weston Education Foundation. Later in the budget process, thanks to Ruby Hedge, we can share with you as an update the 9 to 10 years of major giving from the Weston Education Foundation that's been so essential to our work, and most recently with the DBT process here in Weston has been critical. What is the story with this budget? The story is actually a very lean one relative to a very challenging growth number. None of us from the administration, none of us in the district want to have a growth number of 5.55%. As we'll explain this evening and discuss at length over the next month, core growth drives nearly all of that at 4.97%, and targeted investment growth is at a very small 0.59%. You can see the dollar figures there. When we talk about core growth, this is the guts of what we operate with here in Weston. It's the contractual obligations for personnel and essential services. It's health and dental insurance. It's the specialized transportation requirements. Core growth, and what we're arguing we need and really require, is that support to maintain the educational programming excellence we have, curricular and co-curricular, to maintain the very competitive educator to student ratios we have, the very competitive administration, leadership, and supervision that we have compared to Durgay and other top districts in this region, and to help us even do better on operations and facilities. Part of that core growth number, which Phil in particular is going to explain in a bit, is driven by some significant decisions that had to be made between the approval of the FY20 budget and now the recommendation of the FY21 budget. Each year since I've been here, and I think also under Colleen Palmer, there was target investment each year raised. This is one of the leanest years for that, and that's quite really due to that larger core growth number being so dominant. Target investments for us are areas that the leadership team has flagged as requiring a bit more support, a bit more attention to really deepen and strengthen our work. There are 5 areas this year we're featuring. Math and reading instruction outcomes. It's something we've been working on with the curriculum committee for the last couple months. It's a bit of revamping of our K-5 math SIL structure and implementing an academic center at the middle school. It's also modifying how we're supporting math and reading K through 8. Special education related services and past budgets, that's been a major significant piece. This is less so now. We want to maintain the good work that's underway in that restructured approach. We still have the need here to invest in particular needs as it relates to speech and language and critical staffing that's required based on student needs. School counseling, grades 6 through 12. What we're recommending here is a modification, no FTE change, but a modification in the director of school counseling. So it would be a shared administration and staff position with the lead at the administration side. This would provide us more oversight, more supervision, grades 6 through 12, in our full counseling operation, not just at the college placement level, which is such a key part of Weston, but also at all the other areas of academic and social emotional needs. It adds an administrator partially, but the FTE count is the same. Music and theater arts programs, the actual dollars there are fairly modest, but we need to round out our support and oversight for theater through the theater coordinator position, plus add in some technical needs, the soundboard and the instruments at the middle school. Lastly, security measures. We had an executive session for the board today on security. That's a place that by state law, we by right talk in great privacy with the board about what those measures are. It's a rounding out of a 5 or 6 year plan on being very comprehensive in our security approaches. Enrollment is something we pay a great deal of attention to in Weston. Just quickly, going into next year, we're projected to be down just 4 students, and you can see where that drop occurs. So clearly, in terms of our current staffing levels, our current needs for those ratios of the educators to the students, you can see that we're recommending we stay very much the same because our student population largely stays the same. If you look out over the next 4 or 5 years, you can see that over that 5-year period, we have a 4% decline. So that's a little less, obviously, than 1% per year projected. Malone and McBroom's projections have been quite solid. And so we, again, looking multi-year as we have in this budget in many ways, and we talked about that today with the board in the workshop, we are largely having that same population of students now over the next several years. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. I'll now turn it over to Phil, who will dig into some of the budget details.
How's everyone doing? So as Bill mentioned, there were a few events that happened that happened during the development of the FY20 budget, and also that happened after the FY20 budget was approved that will have a significant impact on our current FY21 requested budget. So I'm going through a few of the items. So starting off, we'll talk about SPED. So after the approval of the budget and prior to the start of the school year, it was necessary to hire additional paraprofessionals. These new hires were needed specifically to meet the individual needs of students. The approximate cost, inclusive of benefits for these paraprofessionals, is approximately $235,000, or an increase of 0.44% of the budget. The second line item that we wanted to focus on was an MOU that we entered into with the union. So as you guys may recall, we had some maintenance issue at our fields. So in order to continue with the outsourcing of the maintenance of these fields, the board entered into an MOU with the union. To satisfy the terms of this MOU, we'll be hiring an additional groundskeeper for FY21. The projected cost for this new hire is approximately $93,000, or an increase of 0.18%. Transportation. As you guys may recall, this is our first year of outsourcing our out-of-district transportation, and also a portion of our in-district special education transportation. This past summer, our extended school year services were expanded. This expanded service required additional in-district transportation. In addition, our out-of-district ridership almost doubled our projection. In some instances, the cost to provide these transportation was significantly more than our projection. FY21 requested budget assumes that our ESWR extended school year services will be similar to last summer, and our out-of-district transportation and we budgeted our out-of-district transportation to be more in line with our actual costs. These increases will add 0.67 to our current budget, or $355,000 approximately. Dental insurance. As a cost-saving measure, it was decided that our self-insured claims for FY20 will be paid from our internal services fund. The FY21 budget assumes that the general operating fund will make contributions to the internal service fund sufficient to cover these claims. As you can tell, the cost for those dental claims is going to be significant. It's going to be an increase of 0.75%, or almost $400,000. Turnover savings. To mitigate the FY20 budget, an early retirement incentive program was offered. Based on this program, it was estimated that there would be a $318,000 turnover savings, $318,000. As we return to our normal turnover year, the anticipated savings will be significantly lower than FY20. The projected FY21 turnover savings will be $266,000 less than what it was in FY20. That will result in a 0.5% increase in the budget. Overall, this represents a total increase of approximately 2.5% of our budget, or $1,347,000. So as Bill mentioned, the core of our budget is really driven by purely maintenance of our current budget. It's really core growth. Our enrollment projection that was given to us by Malone and McBroom is going to be requiring us to add up 2.1 FTE to Hurlbut. As you can see, that will add a 0.38 to the budget, or $203,000. Medical insurance. We're projecting a roughly a 10% increase in our year-over-year medical premium costs. That will be approximately net of employee cost share of $847,000, or 1.6% of the budget. Net contractual increases, this is only our year-over-year contractual increase of $544,000, or 1.03%. In district transportation, which is a combination of regular ed transportation and special ed this is only regular ed transportation, $161,000, or 0.3% of the budget. Cleaning contract, you guys may recall that we're currently outsourced for cleaning services. That will add a modest 0.1% to the budget. Overall, this is going to be, all these costs is a 3.41% increase. Just wanted to highlight some offsets that were included within the current FY21 budget. On the net side, we have other employee benefits with a slight reduction of $87,000, 0.16%. Our current technology lease will expire at the end of FY20, which will result in a saving of $104,000, or 0.2% of the budget. We're also projecting a reduction in our spread tuition of $210,000, reduction of 0.4%. Combined reduction of $402,000, or 0.76% of the budget. Also factored into our spread projection, we were projected to have an increase in our excess cost reimbursement of $114,000, or 0.22%. These offsets are going to give us a reduction of 0.97% of our budget for budget. So on the screen, what you guys will find is just pretty much a line by category what the various increases are. I just want to highlight a few things for you. In terms of our salary growth, our year-over-year salary growth line of a line is 4.2% of the budget. Of the total increase, salary is approximately 46%. Benefits is going up by 13%, or are representing of approximately 40.38% of our budget. Property services is going to be a 1.13% increase, $33,000. And we have reduction in our other services. Supplies and materials. Supplies and materials are projected to go up by $116,000, or 4.2% year over year, which is 3.96% of the budget. Equipment increase, $93,000, or 3.17% of the budget. Our other objects represent a 0.24% of the budget increase. Graphically, this is just a graphical representation of the various line items within the budget. Moving on to a capital project. So what we're going to present here is a multi-year projection that was approved by the Board of Ed. It's much clearer in the budget book. So in the budget book, we have our capital projections through FY23. The approved list that was approved by the board, which was forwarded on to the funding bodies, are listed on the screen. We have a total request of $1.1 million for capital projects for FY21. Bill?
Of great interest to the board and the community is multi-year budgeting. This budget, as is necessary by law, is a year-by-year budget, but it's built substantially on multi-year analysis, multi-year contracts, multi-year relationships. We'll be making that clear for the board and the community over the next several weeks. But you see here, for example, that nearly 80% of the budget is related to contractual salary personnel benefits, salary and benefits for personnel. And that is related to WTA and WA in particular. AFSCME is up for negotiation this year, so that 3 year is not clear. But this is an uncommon moment for the Board of Ed to be able to look out over a couple of years with known labor costs. Your unrepresented, non-represented personnel all tend to peg to the contractual bargained relations, so that gives clarity. Our special education, digital learning technology, transportation, custodial services, those all are developed with a multi-year view. We'll be providing the board later this week, particularly within technology, digital learning, that multi-year look. So over the next couple of weeks, I think you'll see that approximately 90 to 95% of this budget is understood in a multi-year way. The other critical thing I'd say is we can look back at some of the critical drivers this year. If we go back to that slide on the FY20 decisions that influence FY21, there were two that were made in full transparency with the board. One was the dental issue, in a sense, to use a football term, American football. That was a punt. To bring down last year's number, we took the dental claims and took them out of the Internal Service Fund. We knew that that would catch up with us this year. It has. We also had another situation there. Let's go back to it so we're all on the same page because it's critical to look at. That 0.75 for dental claims and then the reduction in turnover savings of 0.5. So nearly 1.25% of this 5.5 growth is tied to decisions made last year to save money last year that we knew could have an impact on the growth number this year. And we were very clear about that possibility. As we move through the next several weeks, some decisions may be made around dental claims and all the rest, but we think we're right up against it now with our Internal Services Fund. That may not be a source anymore. Student enrollment. We know that next year at only sub 4 students from where we are now, we need to staff at the level we are, or else they'll have to make some very fundamental decisions about student-teacher ratios, administration, student ratios. We also know that over the next 4 or 5 years, our rates of decline are modest. It is a rate of decline, but it's modest. And districts typically are not going to sacrifice future opportunities for students unless they're really clear on what those losses might be. Final word, a vital partnership. In this particular year, we need to work very intensively with the board over the next several weeks on a set of decisions as we look very carefully at this 5.5% growth. The things we saw to try and bend that number back down all relate to personnel. They all relate to programming. They all relate to administration levels. Those decisions made by the administration alone would not be right. You're the governing body worried about the stewardship of this district long term. We want to work with you in partnership over the next several weeks on what is a very challenging issue. Hopefully it will come clear to the community that this core growth has in it heavy personnel, heavy benefits, and then some decisions that had to get made over the last 12 months that now have created extra pressure on that growth. We've been very modest in the targeted investments, but we still feel there's some there that are critical to underscore, strengthen what we're doing here as a district. That final phrase matters a great deal to us, that we care about the full development in Weston. I was asked today, what sets us apart? That's what sets us apart, be it independent schools, Catholic schools, higher ed where I've been, or the other public area districts I know so well. No other district can point to good quality work in each of those areas, be it intellectual, social, emotional, or physical. The core growth will allow us to maintain that. If we can get as far as the target investments, it'll make it a very robust, enriching system as we move into the next year and beyond. At this point, let me reiterate what the timeline is. It's a very active timeline. We started with a new process this morning, a workshop with the board. Board will be right back at it this Wednesday for a 4-hour workshop digging intensively into the budget. We've added, per the board's request, a public forum on the 21st. That's a chance for the board to really hear from the community. There's public comment tonight and many other forums, but that is a forum solely for hearing from the community about the budget. Budget workshop again on the 23rd. That's a chance for you, as you saw this morning, to really dig into and work on the budget. Budget discussion again on the 27th. Then on the 30th, you need to vote on the budget because by charter, by February 1, it's got to be handed off to the town. And then you see the rest of the schedule. February 4th, the Board of Selectmen review, Board of Finance review in early March, a second review if necessary, and really the vote on March 24th, April 7th the vote, ATBM on April 22nd, and if it goes to referendum, which often is the case in Weston, that's a May 2nd decision timeline. So while the board is most active over the next several weeks, we will continue on this at least up through May 2nd. So look forward to discussion, look forward to public comment, and look forward to a process based on a lot of optimism and patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McCursey, and I want to thank all involved in putting together this budget, the administration, the entire staff. It's a tremendous amount of work, and it takes a huge amount of time to put together this kind of detail in a very thoughtful fashion, and want to thank everyone on behalf of the board for all of the work that they put into this. It is a challenging budget, and we're going to have to work very closely because there's going to be some hard decisions that we're going to have to make. And I kind of reiterate what Dr. McCursey said. I think that working in partnership, making sure that we all really understand exactly what's behind this budget and what the impact would be of any changes we make to the numbers is going to be critical in making sure that we all end up in the right place. Before the board has an opportunity to ask questions, we're going to open up to public comment. Anyone in the public wishing to step forward and make a comment, this is the time to do so.
Thank you. Greg Haythorne, 6 Winthrop Hill. Just a quick comment on the slide here that shows salary and wages increasing by an unavoidable 4.2%, meaning I think the word that followed up was must. We must maintain comparable staffing, salary and wages. So the average inflation rate in the U.S. has been less than 2% over the past 24 months, and enrollment has declined 3% the past 24 months. But our total salary and wages for the district, just because we must maintain comparable staffing, salary, and wages, are going to increase over 10%. So at some point, this board has to recognize the obvious disconnect between what's being presented by this administration as an imperative and what is reality. And it's that disconnect which is creating the damage to our community's prosperity, prospects for our future, and the diminishment in the effectiveness of the education of our children. Thank you.
Any other comment? Board members, open it up to questions now. Again, understanding that we are going to have a session on Wednesday, which is going to be much more detailed in terms of going through the budget page by page. But if there's any questions tonight, just start with Gina.
Well, there was a question I meant to ask this morning, and it did not have it on my list. One of the changes that we're discussing is the shift in the high school counseling and moving one of our counselors into a partial administrative role for counseling. How is that going to impact the load per counselor for students in the high school? Because right now it's pretty demanding to try to get appointments with counselors. And if we pull back and have one in an administrative role, how are we going to compensate?
That the position will maintain the same counseling load that the current position has. So there will be no change in the counseling loads. Lisa, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think it's an accurate description.
Thank you.
From our discussions earlier today, when can we get some of the answers to the questions that we were asking this morning, primarily around current enrollment as of January 1, 2020?
Well, the Cabinet had an extended meeting late this afternoon, 3:30 to 5, to go through something like 42 questions asked, which is good. We're on pace with past years. Past years, we got up to about 70 questions asked, so we can keep it going. You got a ways to go. We've mapped out answers and way to get answers to those questions. I think what I would like to do, and Tony and I talked a little bit about this, is see where we are as of Wednesday morning, pick a time before the 1 o'clock close as to what are all the questions, then begin to list which ones we can get answers to. Some are quick response questions. That enrollment one, frankly, is very easy to come back to you with. Some of the others will take a lot more work, so we want to, and also talk with the board about which questions we feel can be handled verbally, and do you agree with that? Which questions do we think need to be handled in writing? Already, I would advise you, we're ready to come with an org chart on Wednesday. We're ready to come with Durgay administration comparisons on Wednesday. Ready to explain more of the full teaching load. That was a question by providing. There was a question about the salary tables. We have all of that. That would be a handout. The multi-year technology analysis, we'll have that ready as a handout. There was a report done. Really, Matt Phillip authored it, but the curriculum committee dug into that. We don't think we'll present that to you again, but have it for you. It's an excellent report. It looks at the issue of class size, particularly at the secondary level. Class sizes and guidelines are quite clear at the elementary. But I think you'll have that as of Wednesday. The conference travel listing that was asked about, we have that ready. So a number of these things we're able to check off as of Wednesday. But I think what I'd like to do beyond what I've just shared with you, that's 8 or 9, 10 items already, is see what the whole list is, and then map out the timeline. As board members who've been here before know, we'd actually structured in past years into the calendar for the month when questions were due, and we had about a week to get them back to the board. So we're a little more on the fly this year, which is fine with me, when I think this extra amount of workshops we're doing helps, but I really would like to figure out by the end of that Wednesday workshop the timing all.
And Bill, if something to think about adding to the documentation that's going to come back to the board, if we're going to have Durgay comparisons for administration, I think it's critical to note that it's not that we want to do something just because Durgay is doing it. I think having some verbiage along the lines of like why something is considered best practice, like why we need the assistant principals, why we need to have an assistant superintendent of curriculum, why we need an assistant superintendent of PPS. I think that the budget season is a critical time for educating the public on why we do things the way we do. and there's a cost associated with it. But I think, particularly with the challenges that we have now, being very open about what certain positions do and why they're needed will be a critical piece of information to have.
Yeah, and I'm now going to make them sound not like mom and apple pie, but real operational guiding. So the idea of sort of the optimism and patience is then patience translated to iterative. So what I'd like to do is bring the org chart and be able to walk you through that. It's going to include all the leadership team positions, verbally give you a sense of what each position means for me as superintendent, and then you'll have the principals there, you'll have cabinet, you can fill in a bit. But since this will be a new moment, typically cabinet and administrators don't sort of list out at this point all of their job responsibilities, but we want to listen to the board and respond. So coming with the org chart, coming then with a verbal statement on what it is that each of these key roles provides, and then depending on where the board is, we can also do something as we did several years ago. You may remember when we were able to return to a full 1.0 at Hurlbut, and I'm using position, not name purposely, that we had a very strong chart laying out all of the key headline responsibilities, not a job description, but the headline responsibilities, what was mandated by the state, what was sensible for us in Weston, really our Weston standard. We may go to that, but we'd first rather start Wednesday verbal and
That's
see what
fine.
we need, and then we can kind of progress from there. But if that makes sense to what we had talked about earlier today, that's how we'd like to approach it.
That's fine.
But we can, and I couldn't agree more. It's not what others do, but just that comparison point.
Any other?
Is it also worth including in the big book, not the actual contracts, obviously, but the timing around when negotiations happened and were closed around the immovables in here? I think that would be, I mean, I know it's on the public record already, but just to show what really truly is immovable because of contract negotiations that happened and closed some time ago.
When we're going to send the links to, we're going to also, related to Ruby's question, the timing is I don't want to sort of just have stuff flow out without a plan. So meaning here's one set of material, here's another set of materials, so you can anticipate it. When we send you the links to the contracts, that in and of itself sets the dates. We might do a little cover note on it
Right.
to make
That's
clear
it.
what the timing is. That
More
would
for
be
the
pretty easy.
benefit of the public than.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And as we discussed this morning, you can't go back in and reopen the contracts. You can't go back in and renegotiate. So those are things we can have as a little cover note to the links to those contracts.
I have a couple based on the presentation. Just a comment and a few questions. On slide 5, the Malona-McBroom multi-year enrollment projection, the projections, while the Malona-McBroom projections, do say here 4% decline over 5 years. Got to remember that that's pretty close to a 1% decline a year over the next 5 years, which is pretty much what we've seen over the last 10 years. So we're really not out of the woods by any means. I mean, all indications are that, 0.8 versus 1% versus 1.2% isn't that far apart. In fact, it's well within the bands that they've drawn. So, I think it's critical that we really get in front of this. That's what when we talk about planning, when we talk about multi-year planning, it's really about sizing ourselves appropriately for what I think will be inevitable, which is going to be a continued decline in our enrollment over the next 5 to 10 years. It's great if it doesn't happen, but even the projections are not saying that enrollment's going up. In fact, it's going to continue to go down. So I think we just have to keep that in mind as we go through these discussions. On page 6 of the presentation, Phil, there are decisions that we made in 2020 that in fiscal year 20, that we haven't really didn't really cost us anything in 20, it will cost us in 21. And then there's decisions we made in 20 that we actually cost us in 20 and will cost us the same amount in 21. So out of the 1.3 million, what would you say, I mean, just, you don't have to, you don't have to be to the decimal point. What would you say are decisions that we made that didn't cost, that we didn't spend money on versus those that we spent money on this year?
So in terms of decisions that we did not spend any money on in FY20,
Right,
I would definitely say the dental claims, because that did not come from the operating budget.
right,
That was all paid from the internal service.
right.
The turnover savings did not cost us anything for this year. That was a savings, but that's going to have an impact on
Right.
FY21. All the other costs that we have, all the first three items will cost us money potentially for FY20.
Right. Is that an annualized, I mean, will it cost us this annualized numbers or some fraction of it probably?
Some fraction of it.
Yeah.
There are some increases that are factored into this, and also based on you, for example, in transportation, based on students that will be transferring for next year, based on some projection that we made.
Now, how much flexibility do you think we have in terms of moving money into the internal services fund, dental claims? Do you think we have some flexibility or?
So what we have to consider, the main reason why we have a balance in internal services fund was in the event that we do decide to come from the premium-based plan with the state and go back to a self-insured model. So we wanted to have some reserve in that account.
Right.
If we do tap into the internal services fund, that will further reduce the balance that we have. Currently, we have about 1.3 million in that account. However, we still have additional claims to be paid against that. If we do let's assume that we end the year at about $1 million. If we tap into that, that's going to drop us to about 600,000.
So you think there's a chance we can get to $1 million?
If the board does decide that it wants to tap into that,
It will go to $1 million?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, okay, yeah,
Correct.
Yeah.
So we definitely have some flexibility, assuming that that's the way that we want to go.
okay. There was a couple of others. Okay, slide 8 on salary and wage increase. How much would you say, I mean, we have 4.2% on salary and wages. Some of it is contractual, some of it is because budget to budget, we're going from 355 headcount to 364. What would you say the breakdown is between headcount increase and contractual?
So the year-over-year contractual growth, net of everything else, is 544,000.
Right,
PEG also included in this number is a portion of the targeted investment that we have, which is for the 1.4, I believe, FTE.
Right.
And also included in this, Tony, is the additional paraprofessionals that we have.
Right.
So that's all into that amount that's there.
right, so there was 7, it's probably,
I would say, I think we added,
on budget to budget, we added 9. We will add it.
in terms of FTE,
Yeah,
I have to double check that number, Tony, to give you a specific amount.
okay. But there's I mean, you have to to really dig into this number, we have to kind of break it down a little bit into contractual, bodies in the seat, contractual increases versus new bodies.
Right, so
Added, yeah.
for the next workshop, maybe not for this
Right.
Wednesday, but for one of the other workshops, I'll do a further breakdown for you, for the board.
All right. That was it based on this presentation now, yeah.
If I may, just one point, Tony, I mean, the enrollment issue we completely understand. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's the reason in the sparse presentation and taking a different approach this year, given we just need to get working with you, so we didn't want to spend a lot of time presenting things that are understood, and then if there are questions, we'll bring that information to you.
Yep.
But the reason in the sparse presentation, slide 21, the key considerations is, next year, we are quite sure the projections will be quite close in case unless something weird happens, and we have to staff up for basically all but 4 students. And we already are tied in 4th grade, right, Patty? 3rd grade, excuse me, that we're 1 student away, potentially. Yeah, we're right at 24 now in every classroom. As I said this morning to the board, no fault of anyone ahead of me. Colleen's a good friend. I inherited the need to add 3 teachers when I got here in the fall, and that was about a $270,000 add. So typically districts have built in the cushion, we've not. So we have to staff, year to year. Riffing is something that goes on. It hasn't typically happened in Weston. It goes on across public education. People who've worked in other districts are acknowledging, Laura knows, having come from a district where riffing happened a lot. We've avoided that here, but you staff to enrollment in education year by year. So no matter how much you project multi-year, and that's where that gets back to my point about fundamental decisions. That if the board decides we can do with different guidelines, that may open the door to do some things a little bit differently. But the enrollment issue we're completely sensitive to. Nobody here thinks we're going up in enrollment. We see it's a slow decline, not a rapid decline, but it's a decline. We see that very much.
Well, I think that things like enrollment are things that move at a glacier pace, right? Which is, 1% a year, 0.5%, 0.8%. Over the course of 5 to 10 years amounts to a pretty significant decrease. And the issue is, and it's a real challenging issue, is in any given year, the glacier moves slowly, but it adds up over time until you're at a point where you have to make radical decisions if you don't make small ones along the way to continually readjust. And I understand that you're teaching today's children, number of students in the seats today, not the number of future students. And it's all very complicated, but it's something we have to grapple with in this budget.
Right, right.
I have a question. So Gina asked a good question earlier this morning with regards to Project Challenge and kind of the lack of the line item in WIS. And Ken, you responded by saying, well, we've kind of switched up strategy there, and we're not going to, it's going to be more of the coaching, right? That's going to be happening in the classrooms and not necessarily.
No. So I can't speak to the way it's laid out in the budget book, but I can speak to the fact that Project Challenge, the self-contained classroom, that approach is not changing for next year. However, what is changing is the enrichment for math that was a part of the Project Challenge teacher's assignment at WIS is listed as a reduction.
Right, okay. It's listed as a reduction, but I guess my concern of the smaller budget book this year is just around the lack of color and strategies just like that. I went back this afternoon and I could not find that strategy in the book. So where? So
I just defer that to.
Which strategy? The
Phil.
Project Challenge strategy
The
or the
math enrichment, the shift in right? So you're saying the math
that's in the
enrichment
curriculum section it should be.
It is highlighted in.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that would be very similar to Pat. I mean.
Now, when I'm confused, are you asking a book question or are you asking a programmatic question?
Book question.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
what's very similar from this year's book to last year's book is that we raised up 5 targeted investments. It's a much smaller dollar figure. So there really isn't that much more to raise up. Previous years, we had much more in target investments to bring up to the front, but everything that was a critical shift, such as that, was brought up to the front. That's that first bullet, both in the PowerPoint presentation and in the several-page cover memo. That ties back to the curriculum section. It ties back to the WIS section. Ties back to the Hurlbut section. So that writing was very similar, just fewer words. And to be clear, the Project Challenge budget shift, that has typically sat within PPS. If that was a mistake that it didn't sit there in past years recently, it typically should have sat there. So it's not a change in terms of, it's just where it's accounted for in the budget.
Yeah, in the past, we were able to see it in WIS, and then in the middle school, we could see it like by grade. We could see it. And so that's why this year when I was like, whoa, where is it? So I can see it in the special education section, and we show the reduction of 0.5 for zeroing out enrichment. But it's just a little, it didn't flow the way it did in the past.
Maybe it'd be helpful if I just speak programmatically, and then we can adjust, where it's located, how it's located in the book, in a subsequent, iteration. So the idea is that we value the Project Challenge program. We value that students have time with their peers in the self-contained class. We have had 2 teachers teaching, one at the WIS, one at the middle school. Part of their assignment, about half of each of their assignment, is that self-contained class. And at the middle school, the teacher has done other things. Years ago, there was mock trial. Recently, there's been something like Passion Project that the Project Challenge teacher has been teaching. At the WIS, there's been writing enrichment, there's been math enrichment. What is changing here in terms of the approach is the focus on the self-contained class stays the same, but the enrichment is being proposed as an elimination because we think that those resources would be better served going into the math support that we've been talking about at Curriculum Committee. The Passion Project at the middle school as well, that is no longer going to be offered as well. So basically, enrichment at the 2 schools would not be offered. Self-contained class maintained, Project Challenge self-maintained class, and what would happen from a staffing standpoint is one person would teach across those 2 buildings the entire Project Challenge program.
Oh, light bulb
And
just
that would,
went off.
and
Light
that
bulb
does
went off.
not show up necessarily
Okay.
when you're looking at that, so I wanted to make sure you're clear on that.
Yes, so then so at WIS, what would have existed last year of the push-in math enrichment, not the pull-out, even that is going away?
That would be reallocated to
Reallocated.
support.
Okay.
We think, our teachers with additional coaching support will be able to, better able to do that enrichment on their own and differentiate within their own classes. That math enrichment is happening right now every other week, so twice per month. And we think that that can happen on a more ongoing basis with the concentrated coaching, from the CIL, work with the teachers, rather than doing that.
Look, I applaud the idea of having a classroom where within each classroom setting we fully differentiate to the needs of all of our students. I applaud that effort. I think that's fabulous.
In a way, it picks up what was asked this morning about, the value of us going back through the questions late this afternoon. There's some we understood, some we didn't quite understand, but there was a good question, Ruby, about the degree of supports. This is an example where we've said, let's intensify the professional learning, professional development for our teachers, and that will have larger effect. In the enrichment's vital and important, that's more individualized oriented, whereas if you can bolster the teachers more broadly, you benefit more students. And it was a bit of Taffy's point too about if you can get your professional learning that much stronger, the professional support for teachers that much stronger as the SILs provide, that will give that kind of support.
Is that it on the questions for now? And I think that might wrap it up for tonight. Do you have something further?
Well, Tony, I might just want to put our sidebar out here for the full board to help
Okay.
Wednesday,
Yep.
because I really want to help us work with the board as to where we are. So we very much listened to all the questions, as I said, some 41, 42. You may, as you think from tonight into Wednesday morning, have more questions. So our thought would be, and again, this is really up to the chair, what would help us, the principals also will be there Wednesday morning. I can't pull them out of the buildings much, but they've agreed to come out for this, would be what kind of, just listing what other questions do you have, we'll get those down. We might then shift to say, here's the questions we can answer right now, some of those I mentioned earlier, because some of that's pretty substantial, the org charts, the explanation around that, the rest. Then I think it'd be looking at sort of that full set of questions that we have and begin to talk with you about our recommendation on which ones we can answer when. You typically do want to go chapter by chapter, if you will, through the book. I might suggest you let us sort of talk about getting questions answered first. But again, that,
Yeah.
think on that. I just didn't want to land Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. without our thoughts for you on what might be a good way to structure that
Yeah.
morning. Plus, you have the principals. They'll be there a lot, but that also might be a chance for you all to really say, from a Hurlbut standpoint, a WIS standpoint, a middle school standpoint, a high school standpoint, what kind of questions are there?
Yeah, I think regrouping first, if there are some questions that we have answers for that have already come up, we should get that out of the way. If there's some more question, that's fine, and then we'll start going through the book section by section. I think that makes a lot of sense. Before we end tonight, I want to welcome our newest board member, Victor Scandon. Seems like you've been here for months already, I guess. That's what the budget does to you, I guess. But welcome, Victor. Thanks for raising your hand and committing to serve the community on the school board. With that, I want to thank everyone again for all the hard work that they put into putting this budget together, and really looking forward to working together to get to a good place by the end of the month. And with that, we'll call it an evening and regroup Wednesday morning. Okay.
Ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion? Yep. So moved. Meeting adjourned.